Hey, everybody. Welcome to the December OCA meeting. We're glad you could join us here this evening. We've got a lot planned for you guys. Looking forward to a great talk from Rob and what he's going to be talking about, the different types of catfish that he keeps. We've got also some giveaways planned and different things with upcoming events that we want to let you guys know about. So this is going to be a great hour plus session that you guys are going to be able to be a part of on a Friday night in which we're all at home kind of hanging out. And so we're glad you could join us. We look forward to hearing from you in the Facebook and YouTube comments. We're going to have the giveaways done through there, and we'll type up information, let you guys know how to be a part of that. But Lou here is our president, and he has some words that he wants to share with us about what's coming up and things we can be excited about. So take it away, Lou.
Oh, okay. I'm going first, huh? That's fine. Yeah, I was just going to announce this month's BAP that was turned in virtually, like I've been doing. Lee Spencer turned in Xenotilapia bathyphyllus from Kakizi and Pseudotropheus de masoni and Neolamprologus pulcher daffodil, the old daffodil burchardi. And the only other one that turned anything in is me, finally. Coptodon cote, a crater lake African. So yeah, I'll go over the. That's good for now. I'll go over the programs later.
Okay. Well, I'm Don Danko with the OCA. Wanted to thank everybody that attended our awesome, at least in my view, 3-day extravaganza virtually. A little bit different, or a lot different than what we've done over the past 26 years. But I wanted to hit the highlights here. We did have about 195 attendees. I was hoping for 200. We almost made it. So that's pretty good for a virtual event. We had 100, low 100s to 125 people each night. Largest attended night was Saturday at constant 125. And everybody pretty much stayed on the entire time. So we were really pleased. That's kind of unique with virtual events. Get a lot on at the beginning and then, fall off as time goes on. We did raise about, best as we can tell preliminarily, about $3,500 for the Jim Smith Endowment that allows us to provide grants for research and education related to cichlids and catfish. So 2,000 of that 35 roughly came from our rare fish and filtration raffle. So thanks to all of our sponsors for making that happen and allowing us to really make some cool fish available and raise money for a charitable cause here. Also, we had 123 show entries. Our show master, Jeff Natterer, really pulled out all the stops to put on a great show, even when we couldn't do one live. So thanks, Jeff. We did have 8 spotlight vendors that came on and talked about their operations, offered discount codes for you to take advantage of. Some are still live on the discount codes for registered attendees. And we had about 26 featured vendors that also took part with placing their banners in the show program, and they'll be featured online as well. So probably forgetting something, but you can read in our bulletin if you're a member, or otherwise we'll cover more in future meetings. I did want to reach out. I wanted to acknowledge and thank all of our premier vendors that came on and showed us their operations, behind the scene tours, that type of thing. The sponsors are Zugari Pets down in Norton, Ohio. They were our main sponsor for the event. They have a new store in the greater Akron area. Andrew Subotnick, the owner, reached out to me today and said for registered attendees, he's going to extend his special another week. So thanks to Andrew and Jess and everybody from Zugari who supported us. We also had Cobalt Aquatics, and you can see all of the banners, not some of the banners, from our top, spotlight vendors. We call them 2 or 3 different names, so I get myself confused. The second one was Cobalt Aquatics. Les Wilson and Kyle Thaman came on live, talked about Cobalt, showed us their product line in a great video. Dave Schumacher represented his business, Dave's Rare Aquarium Fish. He also donated some rare fish for the raffle. And Imperial Tropicals out of Lakeland, Florida, Mike Drawdy, longtime supporter, helped us, by showing his great operation, his new 10,000 square foot building for breeding, unusual cichlids. Mike Cichlids was another supporter. They're near Daytona, Florida. Mike and Jen Sumagala, and they showed us their cool operation with lots of ponds full of angels, African cichlids, and plecos. They actually surprised us with making an announcement that for all OCA members, they're going to run a constant special, which I think is 10% off. So that's really awesome. They are a long-term supporter as well. We also had Swiss Tropicals and Amazonas, Stefan Tanner, Janine Banks, and David Banks. Amazonas provided a free 1-year digital subscription to anyone who is a registered attendee that doesn't already receive the magazine. Swiss Tropicals offered some t-shirts and giveaways with a certain level of orders of filtration material and other things that he offers. Kevin Cumberton from the East Coast joined us from Tangled Up in Cichlids, showed us lots of cool Central and South Americans, and showed us a behind-the-scenes tour. And we also had, last but not least, the Wet Spot out of Portland, Oregon. Owner Steve Lundblad, Marcy Rivera, and the store manager joined us, Cameron Laufman, and they provided just an amazing behind-the-scenes tour of their operation with amazingly clean tanks. And everybody's tanks were clean, but it was amazing to see so many great-looking fish and so many great-looking tanks. So thank you to all those spotlight vendors, JJ, Kevin, Mayor.
Don
doesn't realize
you're
he's
muted,
muted.
Don.
I hate these earbuds. How long was I muted?
About 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. So at any rate, I don't know if JJ Cabin's going to join later to talk about the other featured vendors or not. But without further ado, I want to bring on a special local guest. If you can let him on. There he is.
There you are.
William Claus Zarzechny of RMS Aquaculture, your aquarium superstore, and so much more.
So much more. So much.
It's become a tradition to have you come online. Come live.
Yeah, give away stuff. I don't have my hat on, but
Well, Byron can put his on, I think, but just to put us in the holiday spirit. But William, why don't you shout out a Merry Christmas like you plan to everybody online here?
Yeah, well, I hope everyone's having a great day and doing well. Everybody's staying safe. I just want to say on behalf of the RMS crew, me, my father, brother, and Mike, just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I wanted to say that we donated 2 $20 gift certificates. They'll be drawn at the end of the video session. So just be sure to stick around for that. And just so you know, in order to qualify for it, you will have to comment RMS, no periods, just RMS, and then your first and last name. Please, if you could just leave it to people who are only in the Cleveland region, as we're located in Middleburg Heights, basically Cleveland, Ohio. So anybody that's a little further away, and we're going to let you want to drive 3 hours for a $20 gift certificate, we'll just ask you if you don't mind to stay out of it. So other than that, I hope everybody's stay safe, has Merry Christmas, and great New Year.
I got a couple of other guys that we're going to probably break your eardrums here, but it is the time of the year for Will's birthday.
Oh, my
so yeah, it is. It's also a tradition. So, 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear
William Clark. Happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you all so much.
How old are you now, Will?
What's that?
How many years now?
21.
21. Wow.
21.
Wow.
Oh, no. Watch out. Watch out.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for the donation to you and your family and Mike and the RMS family. Much appreciated. And thanks for coming online and wishing us some cheer. And we'll raffle off those 2 gift certificates to locals later at the end of the meeting. And I'm going to turn it over to our president, Lou Carbone, once again.
Yeah, I'd like to add that there is a third door prize raffle, and that's for everybody. We can mail it to you. It's going to be a sponge filter from Swiss Tropical, some food from Cobalt, and we're going to throw in a digital electronic thermometer too. And so Byron, you'll be able to do that drawing from everybody that's involved.
Types their name out. If you type your name out, you'll be entered in the drawing.
Right. Just type your name out without the RMS if you're far away, and with the RMS if you're close enough to use $20 gift certificate. So you'll put everybody's name in the other drawing, right, Byron?
Yes. Well, I'm just going to have RMS next to the name. So if RMS isn't next to your name, you don't win the gift card.
Right, but you're still eligible for
exactly
the filter. Excellent, excellent. Okay, with all this excitement with the extravaganza, I have not scheduled speakers as far ahead as I usually do, and I'm working on that right now. But we are scheduled for January, and before I even say that, January, the first Friday of January is New Year's Day. So our January meeting is going to be on the 8th. Okay. I'm double checking. Yep. So January 8th will be our Friday meeting. Our speaker will be Dr. Jay Stauffer from Penn State University, a longtime friend of the club. He's spoken for us at meetings and extravaganzas for many, many years. From the beginning of the extravaganza, he's been around, and 6-time extravaganza speaker. And he's going to talk about the relationship. This sounds real complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. Relationship between morphology and behavior in Lake Malawi cichlids basically means you can tell how a fish is going to act by how it's built. And so he's going to show us how all that works out. So anybody interested in Lake Malawi fish, of course, will want to know how the fish are going to act in the aquarium. And I'm sure it applies to other species as well. And Dr. Stauffer is just a brilliant man, so he's always good to listen to. All right, on to on to tonight's. Our speaker tonight is someone he's spoken for us at live meetings, and so he's gonna. I think, Rob, we were gonna come down originally, right? And then that didn't work out, and so we're gonna do it this way. Rob is well known in the catfish hobby. I found that out recently. A lot of people know who he is from all over the catfish world, not just in this country. So you're going to be hearing a very high level catfish talk tonight. From Milwaukee area in Wisconsin, here's Rob McLure.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Lou. Appreciate it. So let's see if we can kick this off here. All right. Can everyone see the screen?
So far, you still have the little bar there.
Oh, yep. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you, Lou. All right. Thank you very much for that great introduction. And this is a brief and less scientific talk than what I gave in person to OCA. So I'm hoping that it appeals to a broader audience. So the title of the talk is Breeding Corydoradinae Catfish. And yeah, you might say, Corydoradinae, what is that? So Corydoradinae is, composed of Aspidoris, Corydoras, and Scleromistax. Brochus is scientifically placed into Corydoras right now, but most hobbyists still consider Brochus to be its own thing. Even a lot of the advanced hobbyists refuse to call Brochus a Corydoras. So gives you an idea. So a little bit about me. This is a fun photo that the Dead Fish Order in Winnipeg, they were very thoughtful to invite me to come speak in Winnipeg for the Dead Fish Order in February, which was a lovely few days there. I don't believe it got above -15 Fahrenheit, but they made this fun Simpsons-based poster, I think based upon the My Name is Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as. So that was a little fun. I started in keeping and breeding fish, age of 10. I've bred Corydoradinae catfish since 2011 when I first spawned Corydoras paleatus, and really enjoy the hobby and making friends all over the world. As Lou said, I've had great opportunities to travel and give talks. Gave some talks in the UK last year and Canada a few years now, and it's been a lot of fun. It's one of the most enjoyable parts of the hobby to me is all the people I meet and all the friends I make. It's really a lot of fun. I did notice that there was a little bit of maybe, I don't know if you want to call it heckling or whatnot on the Facebook group in regards to the fact that this is a catfish talk. And, one person had stated they thought it was a cichlid club and they were being, catfished. So I enjoyed their little joke there. And, honestly, I have to say, OCA is a great club. I don't know if you guys can see me or just the screen right now, but I'm wearing my OCA Extravaganza t-shirt. I had a great time last year when I went to it, and I want to thank Lou and the crew there for sending me a new OCA t-shirt and a little package. I really appreciate that. I've enjoyed keeping cichlids over the years, and I understand completely, why you guys are so into cichlids. I did a little bit of internet browsing lately, and cichlids they do indeed rock. There's some great cichlids out there. Got these interesting photos off the internet. I can see why you guys are into these fish, and definitely have been told over time that guys who keep the big cichlids, they may be compensating for something, but I found this too. I think it can help. So all right.
That's mean. That's cruel.
Only kidding, you guys. No, I actually do keep and breed cichlids as well, but I just have to give back a little bit of what I've taken. So, so all right. So getting ready to breed Corydoras. This is a little bit of what I call an artistic photo. The flash was a little funny on it, but it did give a good picture of, you can see this Corydoras concolor female is holding an egg in her pectoral fins, and I'm sorry, ventral fins. And that is where the females basically, carry the eggs around and place them around the aquarium. So it's an interesting breeding method that pretty much all Corydoradinae catfish do. You'll find that some scleromistax, in addition to doing this, the males kind of come by after the eggs are fertilized and kind of try to refertilize them after they're placed, I should say. Try to refertilize them a little bit, but this is it's a pretty good illustration. So choosing the aquarium, you may have noticed I've shown a pretty small tank here, 5.5 gallon tank. And when I first really started, having a fish room and getting into fish, a lot of the guys in my club, Milwaukee Aquarium Society, were really pushing me towards keeping and breeding cichlids and keeping a fish room full of cichlids. I actually went out and bought a bunch and started breeding some, and quickly realized with the small amount of space that I have in my home, I was maybe going to be able to have about 10 species of cichlids at most, with very little room for grow out space. I had bred about 30 different species the first year that I participated in the BAP of Milwaukee Aquarium Society, and the Corydoras were a lot of fun, and I quickly realized they could be bred in pretty small tanks, and I bred the Paleotids in a 10, and I realized I could keep a lot more fish in my small fish room if I stuck with something like that. I have actually bred, I would say, something in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 species in a 5 gallon tank, especially if it's a species only tank. It's really not unheard of. A good friend of mine, Matt Schauer, has actually bred Brochus splendens, which is a pretty large fish in a 5 gallon tank. But typically the aquariums that I use are 5s, 10s, 20s, 15s. I've got a few larger tanks, but you really don't need a ton of space if you're keeping and trying to keep and breed Corydoras in a species only tank. So. For substrate, I prefer silica sand or pool filter sand. Pool filter sand is not one size fits all. I learned that recently, went out and got some pool filter sand and found out that it was quite rocky, which is not ideally what you want. You want a soft and very fine sand, as the Corys prefer to dig, and they actually will pull the sand into their mouth, kind of searching for microorganisms, and pull that out through their gills. And if the sand is rocky at all, they really can't do that. The other thing you want to watch out for is if you absolutely hate sand or don't want to use it, you don't want to use any kind of sharp or jagged gravel, because as they do dig into that substrate, they can jab themselves, they could damage their barbels and start infections. Keeping bare bottom tanks, while great for other fish, I found unless you're going to clean that bottom every day, the bottom of the tank, which is where they live, where they feed, where they're constantly searching for food, tends to get kind of filled with mulm and eventually different kinds of bacteria, some helpful, some harmful. But what I've seen with the bare bottom tanks is that they tend to not only get infections on their barbels, but their lower fins. One of the things that I learned right away when keeping and breeding Corydoras was I think the third Cory I ever bred was the Corydoras meti, the bandit Cory, and I turned those in for BAP. And I had raised the fry on bare bottom tanks, and I got them to relatively good size and turned them in. And I also sold a few small groups to people in the club. And I had a number of people come back to me and say, Rob, these fish you sold me are useless. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And they said, well, Corydoras breed with their ventral fins, right? And I said, yep. And they showed me, sure enough, they had gotten infections on their ventral fins while they were being raised, to the point where it basically burned off the spine. And the fish that I had raised on bare bottom tanks had no ventral fins. They were gone. They basically, the spine burnt off and they could not grow them back. So that was an interesting thing that I learned. And I talked to a lot of people online and all around, and they all said, yeah, you really got to keep them on sand or some sort of a soft rounded gravel substrate, or you're going to have problems. The photo of the river there is a photo that my friend Jeremy Bosch took of Columbia and I asked if possible to, something that would show that there was a sand substrate, because a lot of the photos of underwater pictures that I see of corridors taken from the wild show a sand and some pebbles or rocks or some sticks or mulm type of substrate. Jeremy assures me that the photo here does show light colored sand under the water there. So.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
How about play sand? Is that fine enough?
So play sand, I think, is fine enough, and it will work for sure. The only catch to play sand that I find is that the silica sand and the pool filter sand doesn't really need to be rinsed. So you can actually, in many cases, put that in and pour water right on top, and it does not cloud up your water. Whereas play sand, if you don't rinse it real heavily, you're going to have cloudy water for a number of days. So I've also found the same thing with the Carib Sea versions of aquarium sand, that I actually filled up a 29 and after putting the Carib Sea sand in there, and it actually took weeks to clear out. So it took a long time before that dust settled out. So
hey, Rob,
I
found a really, really soft, fine sand that's super clean. That's really cheap. It's Menard's white play sand.
Yep. Yeah, that's actually the photo that you saw of the tank in the last slide was actually that same sand. It's good stuff, and it is super cheap. It's 50 pounds for maybe $5, $6, $7, $8 depending on if it's on sale. Yep.
And it's super clean. Not much rinsing needed.
Yep. So this is a horrible picture, cell phone. And I apologize. It's probably the worst photo that I have in the talk. I probably need to eventually start taking good clear pictures of fish that have injuries or illnesses, but this was a quick snap. This is a photo of a C-133 that a friend had bought me, and it was kept over bare substrate, and you can see that the barbels really wore down to the point where they were kind of nubs. And the fish was otherwise healthy for the most part, but I kept this fish now for over a year on a soft sand substrate, and I can tell you that I still have this actual fish, and it is healed 100%. The barbels are completely back, and they look great. In most cases, if it's like this where they still have something left, you can still kind of save them, but if it goes to the point where the barbels are completely gone, it can be rough shape. So for filtration, I use I have a lot of tanks, 50 tanks. So I definitely use the air ring and the linear piston air pump to provide a lot of air to my fish room. You can get away with the simple air pumps as well, but I use primarily sponge filtration, and that comes with your simple air-driven sponge filters. These are cheapies that I can get at my local fish shops. I do think even with these, the sponges are not the greatest quality, so I like the bases, and they're weighted, and they do a nice job of pushing the air through it. But I think eventually I'll try to replace all these sponges with Stefan Tanner's Swiss Tropical sponges. I think it's just a better sponge material. So. And here, speaking of Stefan, this is almost all of my tanks are set up with these Matten filters. So it basically takes a single wall of your aquarium, one of the shorter walls, and converts it into a giant filter. These lift tubes that Stefan sells move way more water than anything I could dream of. A buddy of mine who's really mechanically inclined, he and I kind of recreated one, and we kept them side by side with one of Stefan's jet lifters, and it was no comparison. Even though the mechanics were basically the same, these jet lifters are really engineered to move a lot of water with not that much air. They do have to be cleaned once in a while, but I like these wall filters or Matten filters like this for another reason, which is they create a horizontal water movement or current, which is more natural to your fish. The vertical water movement's great, but that doesn't really happen in nature, where this is more of your, you can kind of control the flow, and you could have slow or fast moving horizontal water, which is, it's a good thing, I think. So. Hardscape, again, no sharp or rough objects. Stay away from things like lava rock, because they will, move along any kind of surface they can find looking for food, and you don't want to try to find something where they can jab themselves as they're kind of digging or trying to look for food. I use rounded river rock and driftwood, bogwood. I haven't used much spider wood, but I may be trying to do some biotope tanks, so I may try some of that in the nearby future. So. Leaves of botanicals. So I use primarily oak leaves, red or white, and then I use beech leaves. Beech leaves are a little hard to find. I did find a labeled forest, it's still about 3 hours drive from my house, but it specifically tells you that it's a forest full of beech trees, which is great for me because I'm not the best at identifying trees. And I was able to collect a lot of dried beech leaves from there, and they are a little bit, they kind of maintain their shape, and they don't kick off as much tannins as oak leaves, so those are nice to have as well. I also use occasionally some almond or catappa leaves if I really want to kick up a lot of tannin, and those in addition to adding tannin to the water, I found that almond leaves have some medicinal purposes. You just don't want to overdo it on those. In a 10-gallon tank, one big almond leaf is probably fine. Almond leaves, I did find out, do contain the same chemical as walnut leaves, which is jugalone, and if in high concentrations, that can be toxic to your fish. So you don't want to use a lot of almond leaves. I would say you can use almost as much oak or beech leaves as you like, but for one almond leaf for 10 gallons is probably enough. So live plants, I have live plants in almost all my tanks. I didn't show a ton of variety here. Two photos of Java moss, and I really like the Java moss. It's great for the fish hiding their eggs in there. They can use that instead of a spawning mop. A lot of tanks I use a spawning mop as well, but live plants like this can really be a great place for them to hide their eggs. I also have quite a variety of crypts and other types of plants. The only problem with corridors is that with stem plants, they do like to kick them up. So either you can weight them down, or you can use pots and plant them that way. And I found that even with some of the rooted or stem plants, if you plant them in pots and get them rooted well enough, the cories aren't going to kick them out of there. But if they're just in the general substrate, they do tend to loosen them up and have them float for you, which is no fun. So water. Simple things, to keep track of. I think all fish keepers are well aware of this. Temperature. Make sure you have the aquarium cycled. If you have a fish room, I've found with cories, they're pretty hardy for the most part. And if I need to set up a new tank, I can simply set up the sand, a sponge filter, get good water that whether you're using dechlorinated tap water or using some combination of RO and tap water, I can set that all up and take a sponge filter from an existing tank and give that a little squeeze once the tank's all up and running before I put the fish in, and it kind of gives a kickstart to the new sponge filters. I've talked to other aquarists, including Hans Evers, who I know has come to talk for you guys, and he does the same thing. A lot of people with fish rooms tend to do that to get a tank cycled a little quicker. It brings a lot of healthier bacteria from that existing sponge filter into the new aquarium. TDS and hardness. So I find TDS for me is maybe more valuable than pH. I have found that with the water that I use, I feel the fish will survive, the cories will survive for the most part in quite a wide variety of pHs and TDSs. Obviously, super hard water or super soft water, has its issues. But the TDS, my sweet spot is about 80 to 120 parts per million on the TDS. The reason why I shoot for this is not so much the fish, but the eggs. I think I mentioned the third cory I ever bred was Corydoradinae, and I got about 9 spawns off of that fish before I finally had a decent hatch. What was happening is that my water isn't super hard. It's about 300 to 330 parts per million TDS. The pH is about 7.8, 7.9 out of the tap. But what was happening was that there was enough calcium in my water, so the eggs were kind of getting a calcium shell on them, and the fry were taking 8 to 9 days to hatch. They're having a really hard time breaking out of the eggshells, and once they finally did, they were just little string beans. Sometimes they would survive for hours, sometimes about a day, but they didn't have that yolk sac that we all see with cichlid wigglers and plecos when they hatch. Corydoras have that as well, and they didn't have that yolk sac, and they would die. So one thing that somebody had suggested was, well, why don't you go to one of the fish stores that has RO water and change about half the water in that tank with some RO water and see what happens. So I did that, and I took the TDS and it cut my TDS down from 300 to 330 down to about 120. The very next batch of Corydoras meti eggs was almost 100% hatch rate. I had several after that, and with the same results. So obviously, some of the hardness, specifically the calcium hardness in my water, was causing a problem there. Not, like I said, not for the fish, but for the eggs. I had a conversation with Eric recently. Even with me using 50% RO and 50% tap water in all of my tanks, my pH, as I add the water, is still about 7.3, and in tanks that are 20 gallons or larger, that don't have a heavy load, that pH is going to stay the same even between water changes. If I have a high load on my fish tanks, or if I have smaller tanks, once the TDS or hardness is low like that, at 80 to 120, that load will bring down the pH over the course of a week even. But my larger tanks, they hold their pH, and the fish are still breeding, and the eggs are still hatching. So Eric was a little amazed that I was breeding almost all of my cories in water with pH of higher than 7. But it's almost 70 species now, and it's pretty much all the same stuff. So it's pretty telling to me that the pH may be less important than the TDS. Additives and tannins, I think for the most part, I don't add a lot of chemical additives other than prime to dechlorinate. Tannins, I will talk a little bit more about that later, but I have found that adding tannins more specifically than just doing the leaves has really helped me with a few fish. So selecting your breeders, time to buy your Corydoras. These are a lot of the common, what we call lineage 9 Corydoras, the round snouts. And the lower picture there is Corydoras duplicarius, and you can really see the difference there. With the female on the left is both longer and quite a bit heavier than the male. So if you're new to breeding Cory, some really great choices are Corydoras paleatus. These guys I got as a fully grown breeding group, and this was the first one that I bred. And the gentleman I bought them from said, you put them in a 10-gallon tank, sponge filter's fine, use a sand substrate, and then throw a breeding mop in there. And I did that. He said, start feeding them good, have good high protein foods that are sinking, and then, maybe introduce some blackworms in there. At that point in time, I was already doing live baby brine shrimp every day. And Hans and I have talked about this in great detail. He feeds, and I do too, live baby brine shrimp to all the Corys, not just the fry, every day, and they relish it. It's definitely worth it. But it really only took me 2 weeks with these simple instructions and a pretty simple tank to get Corydoras paleatus to give me a bunch of eggs. They specifically put the eggs on the glass kind of behind the mop. They didn't really put it in the mop, but it was easy enough for me to see and find and get them going. So that was a good first one for me. Corydoradinae, the bronze Cory, is about the same. They tend to land them on the glass. A pretty easy Cory to get spawning. Both of these two, the common trigger for them is to use cooler water. So do a 50% water change or 30% water change on your fish tank with cooler water than what's in the aquarium. And a lot of times that can be a trigger if they're in breeding condition. The photo I have here is the real Corydoradinae. So what we get mostly as Aeneas or bronze Corys that we see in the fish stores are tank raised fish out of Florida. What I have seen even in the same store, you can go tank to tank and say, well, where did you get these? Because they look completely different from these other ones, and they're both labeled bronze Corys. And you find out, well, they got them from 2 different Florida fish farms, and they look like 2 different, completely different kinds of fish. So the photo here is a wild caught Corydoras from the island of Trinidad. So science has not really caught up, and they basically have said all the fish in South America that look like Corydoras, they're not going to mess around with it. They're still going to call them Corydoras. Even fish such as Corydoras venezuelanus, which is has bright orange and turquoise in it, they still consider it to be Aeneas. Nobody wants to mess with that. But I sit there and think, well, if Corydoras Aeneas came from the island of Trinidad, and the island of Trinidad has been separated from South America for 10,000 years, I'm kind of not so sure about all that. Seems like that would be enough to make all the ones that are found in South America a different species. But these guys I had, from Trinidad wild caught for about 2 years, and I tried all kinds of stuff and couldn't get them to spawn. And I at that point in time, I had bred a lot of Corys and was trying different things, different triggers. And sure enough, one day I said, Rob, this is Aeneas. Try the old cold water trick. And I did a half or 50% water change, and I used really cold water, 55 degrees, and bam, the next day I had hundreds of eggs. So I was fooling myself with that one. So even though I thought they were going to be much harder to spawn, the old cool water trick helped. Panda Corys, a lot of people can spawn Panda Corys if they have enough plants in their aquarium, and they'll find fry. So that's a good one. Habrosus and Pygmaeus, the same thing. If you have enough plants and cover in your aquariums, you can keep those fish, and you will end up finding fry. They'll lay eggs. You may not even see the eggs, and you'll end up finding some fry. Habrosus, a friend of mine's 7-year-old daughter, spawned those in a plastic 3-gallon tank. She had a bunch of plastic plants in there, fed them well, and bam, she was able to spawn Habrosus. So it's a good beginner one. So. One thing to note, just because it's common doesn't mean it's easy. So these 2, Corydoras sodalis is commonly, very, very commonly, I saw it today on my way home, stopped at a pet store, and they had Corydoras sodalis in there, mislabeled as Agassiziae. So a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times if you see a tank that's labeled Corydoras Agassiziae, even at Walmart, Petco, you name it, I've seen these all over the place. A lot of times it's Corydoras sodalis. And then the other one, which I know you guys had Stephen Grant come to talk, and he's extremely proud of the fact that this used to be Corydoras arcuatus, and now he made a discovery, and it has been renamed Corydoras granti. It is the skunk Cory, and I think that's a much more apt name for it. But that one is relatively common in the hobby, and I think I can count the number of people I've heard breeding this fish on one hand. So it's really not an easy fish to breed. So tips on selection. So I will say, buy your Corydoras in groups of possibly 6 or more. Buy more males than females. That's always a great thing, because the males chasing the females is kind of what coaxes the spawning. If you have more males chasing the females, it's more likely the females are going to give in and say, okay, let's start breeding. Buy your group all at one time. So there are a ton of Corys that look really, really similar. And there's a ton of mislabeling, even among hobbyists, where they think that they have one thing, they may breed it and they may sell it. Triliniatus and Julii is a constant one where they look really close. So you'll see people, even breeders, saying, I bred my Julii, and when we take a look at them, nope, it's Triliniatus. So, what are the chances that you buy 2 of these guys at the pet store as Julii, and it turns out that they were Triliniatus? Then later on, you come back to that pet store and say, I'm going to buy 4 more. Well, that particular time they managed to get real Julii. Well, now you've got 2 different species of fish. So I highly recommend buying your entire group at one time. Don't overspend. If you can't afford to buy that, that group of really expensive ones, maybe try to start with some less expensive fish that you can afford 6 of. Try to work on those, breed those, maybe sell some offspring if you can, and then go back and try to find the expensive one that you want. It's really important to try to not buy them piecemeal. Even some really well-known, breeders I've seen end up buying fish, then buy a few here, maybe some pass away or whatnot. They buy a bunch later, from the same source or a different source, and it turns out that they mixed two different kinds of fish that the vendor was selling as the same name. And now they've got a tank full of hybrids, which, with as many Corys as there are out there, we're thinking somewhere between 300 and 400 when all is said and done. The last thing we need is confusing hybrids to make it worse. So the drawing here shows you, and these are much easier to see if they're well-fed fish, but you can still kind of tell if they're not. Looking from the top, if the fattest part of the fish, looking down at them from the top, is near the middle of the fish, they're kind of like the mid of the dorsal, it's probably a female. If the fattest part of the fish is more so towards where the pectoral fins or the end of the gills are, it's probably a male. Now, I have seen females, that are starved, where you're going to see that kind of thing. Hopefully, they've seen some food along the way, and they've gotten a little bit of girth to them, so you can kind of see that what's male and female. The pelvic fins, not a perfect one. The male's pelvic fins tend to be a little bit pointier. These are the ones that hold the eggs, and the females tend to be a little bit more rounded. Some species, as you can see with the photo on the lower left, it's way obvious. It's a super pointy pelvic fin on that male, and some it's not so obvious. So, but the rounded ones tend to be, that basket for holding the eggs. So that's a female. Very rarely you'll see a long snout Cory, and this is a pectoral fin, which is the other photo there. A male long snout Cory in good breeding form is going to get a fat pectoral fin full of spines, and that kind of is a dead giveaway that that's a male. There are some Corys that are also sexually dimorphic. You'll have to kind of do a little research to find out which species have differences that in their patterns or appearances based on the male and female. So feeding your corridors, I feed a variety of foods, and I highly recommend feeding a variety of foods. I can tell you that corridors, as much as people like to sell them as your garbage pickers or whatnot, they do not eat fish poop. They also do not in nature eat a lot of plant matter. So the idea of feeding algae tablets and whatnot, well, sure, they will eat that if they're starving. Some of them may even like it. I find my Corys go after spirulina real heartily. That doesn't mean that their bodies are suited to digest that. Some gut studies that friends of mine have done down in Brazil have shown that they're pretty much consistently eating small organisms, worms, insect larvae, those kinds of things, in addition to other animal matter that falls into the water. An interesting gut study showed that one Corydoras, which wasn't even very big, had ants and spiders in its belly. So those are obviously not water bugs, but they had fallen into the water and had become food for the Corydoras. So they definitely eat. They're micro predators. They eat small organisms. They are not grazing on algae. They may get some, but it's not even as much as like the cichlids who graze on aufwuchs. They are getting some microorganisms with their algae, but the Corys really, they're going to go after in nature something that's alive and something that's moving. So. Everyday care, water changes are important. Water changes can also, induce a spawn. So I highly recommend, doing your water changes. It's good for all kinds of fish, really. You want to make sure that you keep that water quality at its highest. I personally am a little crazy. I do 50% water changes on all 50 tanks just about every week. I slack just like everybody else. Sometimes it goes 2 weeks or 2.5, but I try my best to do 50% water changes every week. Monitor the temperature and conditions. It's really important. That is something that you need to pay attention to. Try to also learn where the fish are coming from and learn what kind of water they're coming from. The Rio Negro in Brazil is a quite warm body of water. They're generally higher 70s is a much better condition. I've gotten some Rio Negro fish that I kept a little cooler and they really didn't do well. And I thought, maybe they're sick or something. But I eventually said, okay, I'm going to boost the temperature up to 78. And bam, they got better like that. That was Corydoras burgesi. I had actually lost some, went back to the same vendor, got some more. And but once I boosted that temperature, I stopped losing fish, and they got a lot healthier. That I still have that fish, and it's breeding now at 78 degrees. So others are much cooler. Corydoradinae macropterus here, which is the one that kind of shows when I first got them and what they look like in breeding condition. They definitely, at least sometimes of the year have cooler water. They can have even into the 60s. I generally don't keep them above 75, even though a lot of people have told me, oh, they really need cold water to breed. My Scleromastox macropterus have bred at 75 degrees, so I don't buy that. But they definitely don't need to be kept at 80 to 90. That's not going to do them any good. So pay attention, do a little research, and try to figure out where your fish are coming from, what kind of temperature and conditions they need. So spawning triggers, this is my one boring text slide, and I apologize for that. So as I mentioned, water change, using cooler water, adding live foods, big one. So a lot of times I found, especially with these elegans types, by elegans types, I mean fish that look like Corydoras elegans. There are a lot of different ones. Moving them to a new tank or completely cleaning out their tank is really what gets them to go. It's an interesting thing with that type of fish. One of the guys I know in the PVAS club had spawned C123. They call it the yellow cat. It's an interesting elegans type of cory with yellow fins. And he was doing this, year to year. Every year he was kind of letting their tank, get established. And he knew what his plan was that eventually he was going to set them up in a new tank, and he knew they would breed every time after that. He did that year after year after year. It was really interesting. So I find that having another species in the same tank, same water, that spawning can help. I actually did a little experiment with this early on in my fish keeping career. I had a 33 long 4-foot tank, and I divided it up. I had stirbai in one chamber, Corydoradinae from the fish store that I had, which were spawning, and I knew that, and the black Corydoras in another chamber of that 33 long. So I had 3 chambers. I placed the Aeneas in there and knew that they would spawn. And sure enough, I think after a few weeks, even though I'd never gotten the stirbai to spawn before, they started spawning as well. So I think there's a little bit of that, maybe pheromones in the water type of idea. If something else is spawning, it may be worthwhile even moving some of that spawning tank water into another tank where you're trying to get another fish to breed. Be careful, keeping them together without dividers though, because some of them do hybridize. So I will say, keep them in separate tanks, but at the same time, you could try to use that water from a tank where they're breeding, or you could try to keep them in a divided tank and take one group that's breeding and another that you'd like to get to breed, and see if you can coax them to spawn that way. It's pretty interesting little experiment. Sometimes removing all the fish, if you have a community tank, removing all the fish but the breeding group from your tank is kind of the trigger. That's what gets them to start going. The common ones, storms and low pressure systems. A lot of people in Corydoras breeding are well aware of this. Moon phases. So Bob Townsend, who's a native Ohioan, and he mentioned to me that largemouth bass, he's a big fisherman, and largemouth bass spawn more frequently the 3 days around a full moon and the 3 days around a no moon. It's just anecdotal at this point, but I have noticed that when the moon is full or there's no moon, I do see more spawns in my fish room. I have no proof that that's actually a trigger or anything like that, but it does seem to be somewhat true. Addition of tannins, specifically with those macropterus that I showed you a little before, I found that adding the tannins to their tank was a huge incentive for them to spawn. I talked to another fish keeper who lives in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where they're from, and I had showed him my breeding tank, and I mentioned that I had bred them once, but that was it. And he said, Rob, their water, it's your tank is clear. And he says, I've caught these fish. They live in Coca-Cola. They live in very dark water like Coca-Cola. And I said, I'm going to try to really darken up this water. And I boiled a bunch of leaves and alder cones and other things things and made, you know, a real big pot full of dark water. I let it cool and poured it into that tank. And within days, they were spawning, which I hadn't spawned them for almost 2 years. So that was really a big thing that they needed. They needed that addition of tannins. Slow water changes. A friend of mine in northern Wisconsin showed me a real weird trick that he does, which is he puts a complete lid, so make a tight-fitting lid for your aquarium, and then he would change some of the water out of that aquarium using an air line and a little valve for an air line. So he was dripping the water out of the tank. So it just really slowly over the course of 6 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours. I think what that's kind of doing is creating a little bit of a low pressure system within the tank. He was just filling it up normally after that, and he got several species to spawn like that. I've tried it a few times, and I did notice that I had spawns after that. So it's an interesting way to do it, and it did work for me at least a few times. So adding current, as I mentioned, those Hamburg batten filters, power heads, there's a lot of different ways to add current to your tank, or sometimes alternating between more and less current. I've heard a few aquarists say that they have a power head set on a timer so that there's current sometimes a day and sometimes not. I haven't tried this myself, but I do feel that current is really important, especially horizontal current, for getting some species to spawn. And I will say that for me, adding the current in some cases has caused a spawn. Dry spell. So this is one that I have tried. I don't have a lot of guts on this one. So Hans and Ian, specifically Hans Evers and Ian Fuller. Hans has been known to take his expensive rare cories out of his tanks, place them in a 5-gallon bucket on the floor, and ignore them for months at a time, giving them a dry spell. He then, after 6 months, he will move them back into a nice tank, give them lots of food, and bam, they start spawning. For me, I've kind of gone with Ian's dry spell method, which is more so lowering the water level, feeding them less often, still giving them some filtration, and then eventually raising the water level back up, giving them more food, specifically live foods. For me, what ends up happening most times is I go, about 2 to 3 weeks into this dry spell and start freaking out that my fish are going to die, and I bring them right back. So I'm probably not doing it long enough, but I haven't had a lot of good luck with that dry spell technique yet. So my Corydoras laid eggs, yippee, now what? So this is my first spawn of Scleromystex macropterus. They gave me a ton of eggs, which is really exciting. So this is how I have had success hatching Corydoras eggs. It is not the right way. There is no right way. I'm just going to give you guys what I do, and I'm hoping that can help you, to do it yourself or come up with your own method. So small number of species that I mentioned, Pygmaeus, Hebrosus, Cystatus, you can just leave the eggs in the tank if there's enough plant cover, and you will find fry with those species. Using a specimen container for everything else, for the most part, all the other ones that I've spawned, I collect water from the breeding tank, and I add aeration to that water, and I collect the eggs. Most times I collect the eggs by hand. I've had people say when I collect the eggs by hand, if I pinch them in my hand, they pop. For me, what I see is either you collected them too soon, because I do think that the eggs, as they're laid on the glass specifically or in plants, they do take a little while to harden up in the water. So I usually, after I see them spawning, I'll give it an hour or so for those eggs to harden up. If they're freshly laid, I do think the shell hasn't quite hardened up yet, and they are more likely to pop. But if you have let your eggs sit for several hours and you're going to collect eggs and they pop, for me, I can squeeze them, not hard, but I can squeeze these eggs gently between 2 fingers, and they usually don't pop. They're pretty elastic. If they do pop, when I collect them by hand, it's usually because of the fact that they were not fertilized. And that's what you'll see is a lot of times the eggs are real white and milky in color if they're not fertilized. And I've noticed that those white and milky eggs are the ones that will pop in your hands. I hate to say, go ahead and try collecting it by hand, because a lot of people like their own methods, which is using razor blades or credit cards or whatnot. But I've found that I've had good luck doing this. And pinching them between your fingers doesn't hurt them. I don't have super oily skin, but I don't think the oils of your skin, some people have said that, I don't think that hurts them either. So I haven't had bad luck with any of that stuff. So I personally started off with methylene blue. I noticed that some friends of mine that use methylene blue, especially in really high doses, were producing offspring that had a lot of deformities, whether they had bent spines, or they had reduced gill covers, or they had messed up eyes. I noticed that the people who use heavy methylene blue were having these deformities. I had a real interesting talk with Stefan Tanner about this. I think it was hours long, and he kind of explained to me that methylene blue would have an effect on DNA of developing fish, and I trust him. He's a PhD, I believe, like microbiologist, so he knows what he's talking about. At that point in time, I started using Ian Fuller's method, which is to use alder cones specifically. So I put these eggs in the hatching container, and I use alder cones. Alder cones can be purchased online, or if where there's some alder trees that can be collected. I always collect alder trees about this time of year. Late in fall is the best time to collect them, because they have the most tannins, and they haven't seen a winter or a lot of rains or snows where it's kind of drained them of those tannins. So if you're going to collect them, this is the best time of year to do it. They are a broadleaf tree. It's not a pine tree, even though they make these little cones, and they typically grow near water. I know where a few are near me, but if you have any ideas where some are, and you can collect them yourselves, it's a lot cheaper. But they are available online from many sources now, and they're not super expensive. So you can get alder cones. And I add moderate aeration. So this is not like a egg tumbler. The eggs should not be floating in the water or spinning around. You can kind of see in the photo here, the eggs are sitting still, and I've got some aeration. I've got another photo here. Yeah, this is relatively high moderate aeration out of an air stone, but the eggs are still not moving around. You can see that the alder cones, even after several hours, have started to add the tannins to the water. The point behind this is that the tannins from the alder cones in the egg water coats the eggs, and prevents them from spreading fungus to each other. So if there are any that are unfertilized, or if the fry dies in the egg, you're going to start to see some fungus on these eggs. The coating of the alder cones tannins prevents the fungus from spreading one egg to another. I've had situations where I've had a fungus egg attached to an alder cone, coated a good egg, and even though the fungus egg is stuck to it, the good egg still hatches. So it's really a good method of doing that. It's perfectly natural. This is I got a little microscope. It's a cheapy USB one, that can take photos. But I had a little fun with it, and you can see day one, you're not going to see much with that egg. Day two, the color may change. It might be a little darker. These are all. There's been no alder cone staining on these eggs, so these eggs are completely without any kind of methylene blue or staining at all. So by day 3, you can see eyes, and day 4, you can see the shells start to break down as the fry. I took some video of this. I'm not going to show it because I don't like doing video and talks, because I've seen it bomb too many times. But you can see the fry wiggling around, and I think that they're kind of breaking down that shell on the inside of day 4. And by day 5, they usually, what I see is they spring that tail out. That tail, as they spring that out, that's the first thing to crack the egg. And a lot of times, especially with alder cones, you'll find these, what I call an egg with a tail. So what I do with those, if I see that egg with the tail and the fish is having a lot of trouble, is I'll suck them up in a turkey baster and kind of spew them out. A lot of times that frees the fry from the egg if it's got a tail and it's moving around, but the top half is still an egg. So other than that, I think, the main thing is just to keep an eye on them. I have found recently, with some species specifically, you can keep the eggs in a tank, floating in a tank in that container at a little warmer temperature. So if I have a tank that's, let's say, 78 degrees, and I keep the eggs floating in that tank, they will develop and hatch a little faster, even from the same spawn. So my room temperature is about 70 degrees. So if I keep the eggs at that temperature, typically for a lot of species, that's 5 days, maybe 6, but if I keep them in, floating in a tank that's 78 degrees, I found I can increase that hatching time to 3 days. And I haven't seen any problems with the fry. I did a little, home experiment, and I bred a lot of Scleromistax preanotus at the beginning of last year. And I had a pretty big spawn, and I took 40 of the eggs and I floated them in the tank that was 78 degrees and kept 40 outside that tank at 70 degrees. Almost all the eggs hatched. The 78 degrees eggs hatched at, I think it was 3 days. And then the 70 degrees eggs hatched at, I want to say it was day 5 or day 6. Then I kept them in separate tanks the whole time and grew them out. And I really didn't see any difference in the fry or the fish themselves. There was no difference in growth. There's no difference in health. And it did, both cases, it did produce healthy, very successful bunch of fry. So just some fun photos. I have a macro lens. The photo on the left there is actually a fission egg. That species liked to, for whatever reason, kind of dig some sand up as they were deciding to lay their eggs. So their eggs were sometimes coated with sand. So that's an egg and a fry that had just hatched out of a different egg. So it gives you an idea of the size when they first come out. Usually a few millimeters. They're not very big. They are free swimming, and that specific species, CW80, amazed me. As they hatched out of the eggs, not only were they free swimming, but they were zooming right after hatching very fast. They don't have a sit still period. They immediately start moving around. You can see in the Metai photo that's a day 1, and you can see that yolk sac for corridors that days 1 through 3 I don't feed. They're using that yolk sac to grow. I find that if I add any kind of food to the water, they don't eat. So it's just polluting the water at that point. So I don't really feed until they're 3 days old. So they've kind of absorbed that yolk sac for the most part at that time. So what and when to feed? So as I mentioned, I don't feed for 72 hours after hatch. For the next 3 days after that, so days 3 through 6, I use microworms. You can use microworms, banana worms, Walter worms. It's all pretty much the same thing. It's all pretty much the same size. And I feed them 1 to 2 times a day, usually depending on how many fish are in that container. If I only have a few, 1 time a day is good, because you're also cleaning out that container every time you're feeding. So I do that, when I have young fry like that, I clean that container and I use water from the breeding tank as I clean that container. So I'm replacing the old water in that container with breeding tank fresh water. You do have to watch the conditions of your breeding tank. I have had certain situations where that breeding tank needed a water change and the water was kind of nasty, and that didn't do any good for the fry. So it's okay to do a water change on your breeding tank while you're doing this, as long as it's improving the conditions. It's not a bad thing. So at 6 to 7 days after hatch, almost all species can handle live, freshly hatched baby brine shrimp. And from that point forward, I feed, from days 6 or 7 onward, I feed live baby brine shrimp to those fry once a day until they're fully grown. So I'm a big advocate of that. If you're not doing, freshly hatched baby brine shrimp, since 2011, I've been, highly participating member of the Milwaukee Aquarium Society, and I have not just with the Corys, I've spawned probably about 120 to 130 fish since 2011. And I will say the one thing that enabled me to do that was hatching live baby brine shrimp every day. Without that, I don't think I'd be where I am now. So I try to move the fry. If I have enough space, I try to move the fry to a 5-gallon tank with a sand substrate. Some oak leaves from another tank are great. They're full of microorganisms, Java moss, and moderate filtration. This is how I get the best survival rate. Other people, I've seen them use shoe boxes. I've seen them use floating containers like the marina breeders, where it's pushing water from the breeding tank into that container at a constant rate. And I've tried all of that stuff, but the best success rate that I have is that when these guys are 7 to 9 days old, if I can move them to a 5-gallon tank with a sand substrate, some plants, some leaves, so they can constantly feed on microorganisms and do moderate filtration, that's where I get the best survival rate and the best growth rate. I say 5-gallon tank specifically because you really don't want to put them in a giant tank because they're going to be searching for food all the time. And when you feed, you may have to overfeed in order to get the food in front of them. So a smaller tank at a small size like that is a good idea. So a little bit of growth chart here and getting the best results, as I talked about. This was CW80, which was one that took me quite a long time to grow out to full size. This one took me about 1.5 years, to get out to close to full size. But you can see, as they get older, at first they're really small. They kind of look like a little tadpole. They have that fin all the way around their body. And as they get bigger, they start to look like the adult more and more. And eventually the color pattern starts to develop. And usually by 3 months or so, they're at that adult color pattern. Oops, I went too fast. So that's pretty much the entire portion of the talk that I wanted to share with you guys. But I just also want to real quickly go through some fish that I'm working on currently. Some of these I've bred, and some of them I'm still working on. But these two were really pretty neat for me. Scleromistax prenotus I picked up in 2019 from the UK when I went to go talk at CSG. Mark Walters had bred them, and he only offered me 3 fish, which was fine. I'll take it. So I got those and brought them back home. I know a number of people in the U.S. had tried to breed Scleromistax prenotus and get them going here in the U.S. And didn't have any luck. Thankfully, with the 3 fish from Mark, I've now produced over 200. And started spreading those, and that's all been within the last year. So that's pretty fun. Scleromistax macropterus worldwide, I think I can count the number of people who've bred that fish with 3 fingers, not just on one hand. This past fall, as I mentioned, I learned that adding tannins to their water was really a kicker, and I got a lot of spawns out of them. I've got at least 40 fry of those raising up. The fry seem to be pretty tricky to raise. Of course, fish that's tricky to breed with fry that's tricky to raise. What more could you ask for? These are really interesting fish, and they're really at risk. They're one of 2 Corydoradinae species that Brazilian science has done their own research on, and they feel that these guys are, very close to endangered status. They live near Sao Paulo, a city of 20 million people. Sao Paulo has been known during seasons of drought to use up so much fresh water that they're pulling the rivers nearby the city down to a trickle. So that definitely cannot help these species. I'm sure there's a ton of pollution, with 20 million people. These guys are in harm's way, to say the least. The last changes that Brazil made to their import-export rules, this fish was on the list of fish that can no longer be legally exported. So I got some a while back now in 2016, and thankfully I have them kind of going now. Hopefully I'll be able to produce more of these and get them to the U.S. hobby. It's a neat fish. Scleromistax barbatus, probably my all-time favorite tropical fish, even since I was a little kid. I've always found this fish fascinating, looking with the very bright gold nose stripe and gold specks on it. They can also get really big. A guy I know that lives in Rio de Janeiro was telling me that he was going to collect these fish and telling me that he was finding them in sizes of over 5 inches, which is amazing. A friend of mine also had quite a large male at one point in time, and I would say that one was definitely pushing 5 inches as well. I've only had them up to about 4 to 4.5 inches so far, but hopefully someday I can get one to reach its full potential and get a nice huge one. They're a really neat looking one. Scleromistax CW147. This is an interesting one. I'm not going to try to tell you that I discovered it, but Frank Falcone, who many of you may know, had gotten this fish from Glacier, we believe, in Germany, when Mark Denaro was bringing in fish from Glacier. Glacier had sold it to them as Scleromistax croniae. Hans Evers came to my fish room, and I thought that they were Croniae because that's what I got them from Frank Falcone as, and I was breeding them and selling them as Croniae. And Hans Evers came to my fish room, I want to say it was 2018, and he took a look at that and he says, Rob, I've collected Croniae. This is no Croniae. I promise you that. It's something different. It's something new. So I kind of tried to get as much information as I could from Frank, and we, basically all that we got was that it probably came from Glacier. Took that back to Hans, and he said, well, I can tell you for sure that during the time period which they said they got it, Glacier was not getting any fish from Sao Paulo, but they were getting fish from Bahia. So we kind of assume that it's from the Brazilian state of Bahia. No guarantees on that. We know it's not Croniae. It's something different. So this has kind of taken off and become popular in the hobby now. This is one that I bred quite a bit earlier on and had so much interest that I ended up giving away almost every one of my fish. Thankfully, I had talked to a few friends before that, and they had gotten me some back. So I do have some back now. I haven't gotten them to breed again, but hoping to do so soon. Scleromistax CW8 or C113, in my opinion, it's the same fish. Really neat fish. This photo doesn't do it justice. When they're in breeding condition, that back stripe that they have is like a bright, brilliant white. It's hard to photograph, but it's a really neat looking fish. It's a black body with the white stripe on the side and the white stripe on the top. Males also tend to get elongated pectoral and dorsal fins. I've had one that had some really monster pectoral and dorsal fins. They don't get quite as big as Barbatus, but they will push 4 inches. It's a neat fish. I have had these guys in the past few months for whatever reason. They are going absolutely nuts and giving me a ton of eggs. So I'll have a bunch of those in the near term. So Aspidorus raymundi albino, formerly, I think in Germany was where I first had heard of this fish as Aspidorus C125 red. The UK, they had the same fish. They were calling it C125 gold. I managed to pick some up from the UK in 2017 when I went to the Corydoradinae event that Ian Fuller had put on. Got them back and bred them, and I was giving those talks in Canada, and I brought some along with me to Canada, and the Canadians went nuts for them. I had over 100 fry, and the Canadians were having me ship them to U.S. border towns so they could go over and pick them up. I did bring some to the Catfish Convention in 2018, and I had a few people buy them, but I haven't heard many reports of anybody who bought them from me spawning them yet. I had a little bit of a nightmare last year. My air conditioning in my house, my central air, broke, and was unable to get a repair technician or someone to replace it basically from June through August. So my fish room got really hot. These guys sadly were on a top row tank, and that tank was sitting at 85 degrees, not 100, sitting at 85 degrees for a good chunk of the summer, and I lost a lot of these guys. Thankfully, in the fall, when we did get our AC added back in, they did give me one last spawn, and I had, after that, the last few died. I had one left, but I've raised that spawn up now. Thankfully, it was about 24 fish, and I selected the brightest red of those guys and set them in their own tank, and as of a few weeks ago, I've got them breeding again. So I've gotten spawns almost every other day out of them now. So hopefully we'll get these guys going, get them in the US and get people breeding them here, not just Canada. So that's not a Cory. I am working for this. This is something I'm working for BAP. I have a number of cichlids to do as well, and I will be working on some cichlids coming up, but I'm kind of trying to take these BAP ultimate breeder requirements one at a time. So I'm working on a mop spawning killifish right now, Aphysemia in Australia. It's supposed to be easy. I've bred a bunch of killies. This one's driving me nuts. So hopefully I'll get it done and get it BAP. So. Some others, these are more Cory related. So Corydoras microcanthus, Hans collected these in Argentina, and I believe what he said was 52-degree water. I did talk to people in Argentina, and they say they are not in 52-degree water all year round. It's only some parts of the year when it's cold there. But it's interesting that they will survive at that temperature. I managed to breed them mostly in the low 70s. It's a little fish, a dwarf fish, so it could be neat nano aquarium fish. They're a pain in my neck because they like to lay like 1 or 2 eggs at a time. So it takes a lot to really build up enough to have a good group or to start selling them off. I've sold a few groups of them, but it's painstaking with the low number of eggs that they're producing at a time. Corydoras griffiths, this is one that I had and bred and sold some, but for whatever reason, I had them in a tank with another type of fish, and they weren't breeding. A lot of people kind of said, we kind of want that fish, so got those breeding again. And I walked in the fish room shortly before the talk, and they've got eggs on the glass right now, as well as the red aspidors. Those two both have eggs right now, so I'll be collecting more of those tonight. CW 163. This is an interesting one. Was on the ground level with this one as it was kind of discovered. Was shown photos of this from a fisherman in Manaus, and he and I got to talking, and he felt that they were new. I discussed with Louise Tenkat, and he kind of felt that they were new, something different. So was able to get some of them, breed them. I think the first one to breed those, I did get some to Hans Evers, and that's when they got a CW number. So Hans bred them, and he worked with Ian to give them CW 163. So CW 139 and Aeneas type from Suriname, and then these two. Last slide here. So Corydoras pygmaeus albino I got from a breeder in Norway, and Corydoras carli. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the talk and have some questions. So thank you very much.
I do have one question for you, Rob.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
I really enjoy all the rare stuff, but there's probably a lot of folks online that haven't bred very many Corys and might want to get started. And you alluded to a couple of them that might be good ones. But what would be your top three recommended Corys for people to get their feet wet?
Yep. So definitely, the ones that most people start off with are Paleatus and Aeneas. They're bigger and sturdier. They're really commonly available. They're pond bred in Florida like nuts. They're also really cheap. So Corydoras and Paleatus, readily available, really pretty easy to breed. A cold water change and good foods is pretty much all you're going to need to get those going. As a third choice, I would almost say Panda. Panda is actually a pretty easy one to breed. It's a little smaller than the other two, but it's a pretty cool one because if you have a planted tank, a lot of times you have a really good chance of finding fry. I find a lot of people have Panda as their first one. The little guys are neat, and you can find the same thing, but they are a little more sensitive. So I would say the top three beginners: Aeneas, Paleatus, and Panda. Great choices.
So in the last question in regard to beginner's fish, but scleromistax aren't necessarily a beginner's fish, but which one might be the first to start with?
Sure. Yep. So Scleromistax barbatus was my first Scleromistax to breed. I can tell you that the trick with the Scleromistax barbatus is that they breed fairly easily. You can even keep them in a pair if you have a male and female. They are sexually dimorphic, so you can tell the male has that big gold stripe on his nose and much longer fins. So you can kind of tell a male and a female. But they will breed in a pair. Even though they're so big, they will breed in a 10-gallon tank. I've bred them. I've seen many other people breed them in a 10-gallon tank. The tricks to them are to keep the water in general a little cooler. You don't want to have them in, something under 75 degrees with barbatus is a good way to look at it. The only catch to it is once they start going, even a single female will lay a lot of eggs. I had a single female in a single spawn for Scleromistax barbatus give me 250 eggs. They'll give you a ton. So what I would highly recommend is, if you have the space and have the energy to keep up with it, to start breaking them up into groups of maybe 10 or 20 eggs in a container. What I found with barbatus is that it's not the breeding and it's not the getting them to lay eggs that's the real trick to them. It's the raising of the fry. They seem to really, if you try to raise them even in a tank in large numbers, they must kick off some sort of a a growth stunting hormone or something. And what I found is that raising them in large numbers, you're going to get a lot of that, worn fins, even if you raise them on sand where they have, fin growth problems, where they have just growth problems. And I think that, it's kind of like as people who have bred bettas have seen, is that, unless you're constantly changing the water, they kind of, the fry themselves emit a hormone that must stunt the growth and stunt the growth of fins for all the other fish. So, as much as everybody gets really excited and say, this is awesome, I'm going to, produce 250 Scleromistex barbatus. Well, if you're going to do that, then make sure you've got, at least like 25 tanks out there ready, So, I recommend, taking it slow. And even though they gave you so many eggs, maybe don't take them all, maybe take, 10, 15, 20 of them or so and do it that way. It's amazing too, because the CW38 or C113 is just the opposite, much harder to get them to lay eggs, but I can raise those, I can raise 70 of those in a 5-gallon tank, and I'll see consistent growth rate until they're ready to go up to a 10 or a 20, and they don't do that at all. They don't stunt each other's growth. But barbatus is definitely much easier to spawn. It's a great first choice for Scleromistex.
Thank you. Great insight.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
I'm curious. On after I put up your picture of the Granti.
Yes.
There was a little tiny bit of controversy. You mentioned the Arcuatus.
Correct.
Are they the same fish or very similar fish?
Very similar. So in science, so with corridors, there are different what they call lineages. So there you will find fish that have the same pattern, but you'll find one that it has a real long snout. You'll find one that has a short snout. Sometimes in crazy circumstances, you'll find the pattern, the same pattern with an elegans type, as I mentioned. You can kind of see this Corydoras pygmaeus in this photo here has a little bit of that elegans shape to it. It's got a triangular, kind of snout looking to it. It's a short triangular snout. But you can even find 4 different species that have the same color pattern, but a different morphology, different body type, different snout type. So what they found out was that in science, they didn't really recognize this, and they were going based upon color pattern for a long time. And so Elwin, I believe, described Corydoras arcuatus, but what Stephen found out was that the hollow type, or the first arcuatus that he described, was actually a pointy snout one. So the round snouted fish that we were all calling arcuatus for all these years did not match the hollow type. So the hollow type is actually extremely rare fish. It's got the code number, or had the code number CW36. The only person that I've ever seen in the U.S. that even had that fish was Mark Soberman. I think he had 4 of the real arcuatus. They really are hard to come by. I've had people try to order them for me from Brazil, and 9 times out of 10, maybe even more than that, it comes in. It's supposed to be the pointy snout real arcuatus, and it comes in and it's just a big Granti, a big skunk cory. So, but yeah, so Stephen definitely relishes the fact that he loves to make people guess what fish that is.
That was onto him.
Yep.
Another question: is it safe to move fry from one tank to another? This came from the feed, one of our viewers.
Definitely. Yeah, I do it all the time. I mean, obviously you want to avoid extremes. You don't want to, and if you do need to move them from kind of extremes. So if I have a little plastic container of fry that are about 9 days old, and they are sitting in the kind of open air, I can kind of get a temperature read on them, figure out that it's about 70 degrees. If I really want to move them into a tank that's 77 or 78, I can do that. What I tend to do is I'll slowly take my turkey baster, remove half of the water from their little container, and put in water, fill it back up with water from that warmer tank, and just kind of slowly acclimate them, to that temperature. But honestly, with corridors in general, and with even with fry, a lot of times you'd be amazed at how quickly they adapt to changes, and that's because of the fact that in nature they deal with a lot of changes. That they have huge changes going on from rains and different things on an everyday basis. So usually they're pretty okay. You just don't want to go too extreme, and if you're going extreme, slowly acclimate them to that. So.
How about hydrogen peroxide for hatching eggs?
Some people have said that to me. I have never tried it. It kind of scares me. Anything chemical, kind of scares me, to be honest. I definitely, the only thing I would say about that is that if there's evidence that it works, just follow the dosing instructions really carefully, because I would imagine that any kind of chemical like that, you risk doing a lot of damage. Again, it's just eggs. You're not going to kill your fish, but still, you want them to hatch. So the alder cone method, I've also used almond leaves in the same capacity, but almond leaves are a little bit less reliable as far as how much tannin they're going to kick off and coat the eggs with. But it's a pretty reliable method in my book. It's also completely natural, so you're really not doing any harm. You're not doing any harm to those fish that you're going to hopefully raise up and keep or sell. So.
How about the San Juan Cory? Someone, Karen, says that she has some, doesn't know what they are. They're called San Juan.
Yep. So 99 times out of 100, the San Juan Cories are Corydoras C126. There's a small percentage where they're Corydoras napoensis. A lot of times they get mislabeled as Corydoras bilineatus. Bilineatus is actually a fish from Bolivia, and it is illegal to export all fish from Bolivia, so we're not seeing any bilineatus. So most of those San Juan ones are coming from Colombia. The only place in Colombia that I found a San Juan was on the other side of the Andes, which, as far as I knew, no Cories came from. I could be totally wrong, but it's an interesting that they call them Corydoras species San Juan, but C126 is most likely what they are. Without a photo, I can't necessarily identify them, but if you're on Facebook, send me a message, and if they're in good shape, usually I can identify them in a snap. So,
Don, did you have questions?
I don't personally, but there's one here about, have you tried red ram's horn snails to avoid fungusing?
Yeah, so red ram's horn snails, that's a very interesting thing that I keep red ram's horn snails in all my tanks. I also went through a long period of time of starting tanks over to get rid of the pond or bladder snails. What I found with the pond or bladder snails is, for whatever reason, they have a much better mouth for eating Cory eggs. So the pond or bladder snails will demolish a whole pile of eggs in a matter of hours, where the red ram's horn snails will sit there and mouth over them. They might be able to break through a shell or two, but usually it'll take them an entire day to do that. It could work. I would say my situations where I've seen problems with red ram's horn snails and Cory eggs is where I'm trying to leave the eggs on the side of the glass, and that tank has a ton of red ram's horn snails. Because if you only have a few of them, sure, they're going to do very little damage to those eggs. But if you got a ton of them, they can wipe out a batch of eggs. Yeah, if you've got 30 red ram's horn snails munching on your eggs, sure, it's going to take them a day or two to pop through the eggshells, but they do want to eat that egg. That's the whole point of it. And they wear away at them, and if you have a lot of them, they can destroy your whole clutch. So I found the same thing with shrimp as well. I have heard a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, use cherry shrimp," and I took a single male cherry shrimp and put them in with eggs, and I tried it several times, and what I wound up with was a bunch of empty eggshells and a full cherry shrimp. So it might work for some, it doesn't work for me. I'm just feeding my cherry shrimp eggs. So.
Okay. Are we ready for the?
No, JJ's got a question here.
Okay.
Cabin. Is Rob working with any scientists in S? Jason Den Hayes is an OCA member currently doing research on Cory's, FYI.
Wow. Okay. If he's online, or if you can get him a message, please let me know. I am working with Louise Tencott and also have spoken with quite a lot of scientists that are working with corridors. So yep, definitely.
And it looks like another question here. What is the breakdown rate of oak leaves? I guess how long do they last?
Oh, good question. I find that they last at least several weeks. They'll start to definitely break down after a week or so, but they tend to break down over time. And I leave them. I don't, and I think a lot of people do that. Some people are disturbed by the decomposing leaf in their fish tank, but I don't ever pull them out, and I don't think it really does any harm. At least not for cories.
Yeah, my wife uses them with bushy nose plecos and seem to work just fine for a long time.
And the amount of microorganisms that colonize those leaves, from just a pre-existing fish tank is fantastic. And I think that with smaller species like Pygmaeus and Histatus, and with fry, taking leaves from an existing tank and throwing them in with your fry, or even small pieces of leaves from an existing tank, is a fantastic idea. So.
I don't know how many more questions we're going to take. Probably this might be the last.
Okay.
Dragon Lair, a question from Dragon Lair about the Venezuela black cories from checks I got Tuesday, not feeding, and best parameters to keep them in.
Okay, so those guys I found were pretty adaptable. I mean, it is a Aeneas variant. And most of the Aeneas variants are pretty tolerable. They'll tolerate hard water, soft water. So you could keep them in a pretty large variety of parameters. I actually spawned they're actually black Schultzii. They're not Venezuelanus. Venezuelanus. There was a darker Venezuelanus that was mentioned a long time ago on Planet Catfish, and people have never forgot that. The black cories that are in the hobby right now are actually a man-made variant of Corydoradinae Schultzii that was produced in Germany and then bred like crazy in Czechoslovakia. So it is not Venezuelanus, but they are very tolerant to a variety of conditions. If they're not eating, my thought on that is you probably want to try some different foods. Obviously, live foods, especially if you're trying to acclimate a fish, can be really helpful. Whatever you can kind of get your hands on in regards to that. If you can get black worms, you can get white worms, micro worms, baby brine shrimp. A lot of times that's what I find. If I'm having a new fish that's having trouble eating, I get them on live foods first. The other thing is, sometimes flakes that are crushed and earthworm flakes, or flakes that have garlic in them, that tends to be a really drives them crazy flavor additive type of thing. So look for something like that. That would be a good thing. And take the flakes, pinch them under the water, and kind of move them around, and then they'll sink right away for the cories.
Garlic works for me.
Yep, it's good stuff.
All right, what's next, Byron? Oh, well, thank you, Rob.
Hey, thank you guys very much. You guys have a fantastic club. I really, really enjoyed going to the OCA in 2019, and hopefully, when things get back to normal, we'll be doing it again. And I hope to come and visit. Great group of people.
Yeah, we'll have to take you for Chinese food again, Rob.
Oh no, I was okay. My problem is that I don't eat fish, and that is no fault of yours. But I think that they were using fish oil to cook the food, and so that was kind of disturbing. So yeah, it's a personal problem.
Right. Well, it's up to you next time.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming out to our events, and thanks for coming around tonight and enlightening us on a fantastic group of catfish.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you guys very much again.
All right, thanks, Rob. We're going to do our giveaways now, and I'll post them on screen. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do the Cobalt giveaway first, and then I will do the RMS next. That way we have I can remove everyone who is not local and can't get to the RMS. So here we go. I'm going to add it to the stream. And I will go full stream with this here in a little bit. And I'm going to click, this is for the Cobalt giveaway. And we'll see who wins this one. All right, we have Lee Spencer. So if Lou or Don, you guys want to write that name down and figure out how we can get in connection with them to give him the Cobalt giveaway. All right, and then I have it labeled up here. Basically, everyone who is RMS, so I can hit delete. And we can hit click. And we got 2 giveaways, right? 2 $20 gift cards?
Yep.
All right, here we go.
They can.
Good.
All right, I'll remove him so he can't win twice. And so the next person is up for the giveaway. I think I know that guy.
Who won?
It was Gary Mendez. Did it not show up? Oh,
yeah,
wait.
yeah. What happened to his name? Yeah, Gary won it.
Yeah, it was Gary that showed up, that won it. So.
Did you take him out right away?
Yeah, I took him out too quickly.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it was Gary who won. So, yeah.
Got it down.
So we're concluding our monthly meeting, and that was a great talk by Rob. I think I may end up getting some Corys eventually here. Can you keep them with? I should have asked him this. Can you keep them with Tanganyika cichlids?
You can let them back in right here, huh?
Maybe.
I can.
I got them back in. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, Tanganyika might be tough. The water conditions are really different because they're
okay.
Such hard water. Over time, being a young college moron, I tried keeping them with some cichlids here and there, and subscribing to the fish stores, which were telling me that they were a cleanup crew. These guys will be great. They'll eat your fishes, and so I kept them with Oscars, which was genius. Eventually my Oscars got to the point where they could eat them, and that was bad for both fish. I had a little albino Cory, and I came home from college that day and found the tail sticking out of the Oscar's mouth and the spine sticking out of the Oscar's head, which was, I actually was able to save both fish shockingly, but it was not pretty, and then I also kept them. Again, same thing. I had a Malawi cichlid tank, and somebody said, you need a cleanup crew, and so I got some bristlenose plecos and some albino Corys, and the Malawis definned them pretty quick, so they were in rough shape and in a hurry. So definitely like pistos. One really interesting thing is a little study that I read on the Macropterus was that. There's a geophagus that follows around the Macropterus in nature, and as the Cory is going through the sand and kicking up stuff in the sand, the geophagus was eating whatever was kicking up. And there was some photos of it, not really video, but it was really neat to hear that. So
I have one Corydoradinae horror story, so I can give you another fish to never ever keep with Corydoradinae. I was keeping a few different types of Corys that were hard for me to get at the time, and one of them was Gossii.
Yep.
And great little fish, and they're really, really doing well. But we had a snail infestation in our tank. So, the common wisdom was, and that people would pass on to you, was to put skunk loaches in with your snails. Tanks. So, I started losing Gossii over a long period of time, a month or two. And every now and then one would die, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Everything water condition wise was wonderful. All the other tanks were doing well. And then it finally occurred to me to just sit back and watch. And the skunk loaches were actually eating their barbels. And it was really, really, really bad. So don't keep them with Potia.
Yep. Yeah. The only other one that I can say I would highly not recommend, which I was surprised by, with Godiads. I'm sure there are some that are fine, but the Godiads were munching their fins like crazy too. I don't know what it is, but they were going nuts on those. So I don't recommend keeping Corys with Godiads either. So
must be a little tasty.
Very early in my career, I lucked into some red bay snooks, Patinia splendida.
Yeah, those are cool.
I didn't know any better. Yeah, well, the one didn't think it was so cool when he tried to eat a Cory. I had to do surgery. I saved the Patinia, but not the Cory, as you can
imagine. Yeah.
I have well water, and so my water is naturally like in the 9s almost. So it's great for Tanganyikans, but anything else, and Malawis do well. But it's
you might be able to in its own tank. You might be able to do the Aeneas or Paleotis, from Florida. They're pretty well adapted to harder waters. Yeah.
Hey Byron, I got a non-Cory question.
Yeah.
Relative to Tanganyikans, your red-eared sunfish, I think they were. Yeah, they're doing really, really well. But you said that you kept them with cichlids, and that they only worry about themselves.
Yep.
Now I have these. I have a 125 full of some Triglochromis otostigma that I really don't want to lose. But how would a few of those long-eared sunfish, red-eared sunfish, go with them?
Only when they're spawning are they aggressive, and that's only during May through August that they spawn. But then again, they only protect their nest. They don't care about anything else but their nest. So if nothing goes in their nest area, they'll leave them alone. They're not going to be a Mbuna that relentlessly chases a fish throughout the whole tank.
Well, I'm sure JJ Cabin's cringing at my question, but that's okay.
Well, I just added those Isul Hemiochromis to my Tanganyikan tank because they only get 4 inches at max, and they're pretty peaceful, and they were really small, and I had no other tank to put them in. Eventually, they'll go in another tank, but at their size, I was like, they're going to go in that tank and they're naturally like high pH, so I just kept them in there, and they're doing great.
Cool.
Yeah, I read that too. They come from real high pH water. So,
yep. And so they might end up doing well in my 140 with my Saboise green Foe. So, it may end up not being a bad thing that they take their own little area and they're fine because they're so small.
So how many people joined tonight? Do you have a feel for that?
Well, I need to sign out here. We're still live. So I'll sign out here and tell everybody, hey, great meeting. We had up to 80 people who were at one time watching, and we thank you guys for showing up. And thanks for our last 54 people who are watching with us. And you guys have a great night, and we'll see you next month.